Hello, in this video I will try to find solution for one of the biggest problems I faced in 3D industry. That problem is the long rendering times. Yes, this problem could be solved by increasing hardware power or using render farms. But it's very expensive. Also, there is scene optimization techniques for rendering, which is usually time consuming. So, can we make automated optimization? In this challenge I will be using Blender 3D software, which is my main software I work with. It's free open source software which allows every user create its own add-ons. For this problem I have decided to create my add-on in Blender which would help with optimization. I got this idea from game engines where they use similar technique. I think everybody is familiar with term level of details or shorten LOD. If you don't know what the hell is this, basically there is same object which has different detail level meshes which are turned on and off depending on object distance from camera. This is almost same what I will be trying to do in this video. In Blender and in any other 3D software there is subdivision function. This helps increase 3D mesh resolution to get smoother shapes. More subdivision levels mesh has, better it looks in final render. But every subdivision level model requires more memory to load it and it takes more performance to render it. What I will try to do is to set subdivision levels depending on object size and distance to the camera. And this will work with subdivision and multi-resolution modifiers. Firstly, I wrote basic algorithm to check if this idea even works. The first attempt was very simple. Code goes through every object in scene and calculates its size, var count and distance to camera. Then it chooses optimum subdivision level. It worked pretty well, but there were some minor and major problems. One of the biggest problems was that there will be some high poly meshes even without subdivision. So, to solve this I added some input settings which allows to set what amount of vertices for mesh is too many to add subdivision. This is very useful to protect Blender from overload, for example with photoscanned or other imported detail models. I added code which creates two layers on subdivision and off subdivision. Objects and objects in child layers of on subdivision layer will be affected by adding optimized subdivision and off subdivision layer will be affected by removing subdivision. There was another big problem. The subdivision value drops too quickly depending on distance from camera. So, I changed algorithm formula and tested again and it looked better. Another big problem in my code is that it adds subdivision to meshes that are very far away where subdivision isn't useful. Opposite, it is more harmful there than it is useful. So I added value apply subdivision, which basically means factor when subdivision is not added as modifier. My algorithm gets values from camera and object and calculates what level of subdivision to use. If it is more than 0 it adds 1 level, if it's more than 1 it adds second level and so on. Apply subdivision sets limits when not used modifier default is 0.1. It means that, if algorithm calculates subdivision factor less than 0.1 it will not add subdivision instead of adding 1. Okay, now it looks that I added all limits to not overload the Blender. But there is another issue which makes my code unusable. It doesn't work with animations. Animation problem was way more harder than I thought. I tried execute code after every frame change, but it was very performance heavy. Then tried to call it before rendering every frame, but that crashed Blender every time. Is there any solution for that? What does Blender do with performance heavy solutions? It bakes them to animation. I started making function which bakes subdivision levels to animation keyframes based on camera and objects transform. What does it do is that it goes to every scene keyframe from start to end. Calls function to calculate subdivision levels. Then it inserts animation keyframes into subdivision levels. This baking takes a lot of time. But let's find out if is it worth it. Let's do the math. My test scene with 82 objects and 300 frames was baked in roughly 7 minutes 20 seconds. Let's do one frame render test. Optimized render took 2 minutes 21 seconds 94 milliseconds with 256 samples and cycles. Then I copied that scene and deleted all baked subdivisions and set them all to max subdivision values, which was 6 for both scenes. Maximum 6 levels and no more. Unoptimized scene took to render 3 minutes 16 seconds. Which is 27.5% difference per one frame. Wow! If it takes out 54 seconds render time per frame, then it means we fight back baking time after 9 frames and we still have 291 frames left to render. Which means we can save a lot of time. Let's try to render all animation. That was mistake because it took more than 24 hours to render both scenes optimized and not optimized. 11 hours 48 minutes for optimized scene and 14 hours 6 minutes for not optimized scene. 16.3% faster, that is decent result. Now time to test it on Eevee. One frame for optimized took 1.79 seconds and it took 4.64 seconds for not optimized, which is 61.4% faster. Optimized animation took to render 8 minutes 56 seconds and not optimized animation took 9 minutes 40 seconds, which is 7.6% faster. Why is there so big difference in frame rendering and tiny difference for animation sequence? It is because rendering one frame it takes time to load scene, and for animation sequence it loads scene once. In cycles, huge render time factor is light bouncing. That's why I added some meshes on top. Let's try without these meshes to see geometry details impact more. Optimized took to render 8 hours 40 minutes and not optimized took 10 hours 24 minutes. Which is 16.6% difference. Basically the same result with more light bouncing. To sum up results, this plugin will be helpful if you have many objects with subdivision or multi-resolution modifiers. Or you have low-resolution objects in scene that have not enough details to render it from short distance. Now, I will show you how to set up your scene for using this add-on. After you installed it, you will see the Dovx optimization panel in 3D viewport where you see variables, max subdivision, which is maximum subdivision levels allowed for modifiers. Then there is apply subdivision, which tells when not to apply subdivision. If object is far enough it will not apply subdivision. Higher the value, closer the limit to not apply subdivision. Then there is vertices not subdivision, which sets vertices count limit when not to apply subdivision. Bake animation bakes animation of subdivision levels depending on camera and object's movement. Then there is create collections. After clicking it, you will see two new collections, off subdivision and on subdivision. In on subdivision collection you need to move objects and collections where you use subdivision or multi-resolution modifiers. In off subdivision collection you will need to move objects and collections that won't be using multiers or subdivision. Add-on automatically chooses between subdivision and multi-resolution. If object before had multi-resolution, it will have optimized multi-resolution. Else, it will use subdivision. If you're interested in this add-on, I will post download link when it will be uploaded on any platform. Thank you for watching and goodbye.